I took some photographs, everything's fine, and I thought, "Oh, let me get a picture without his hat on." And I reached in and I took his hat off his head and Robert came alive. Now, it wasn't like he stood up in the chair and started doing a jig, um, but the energy in the room changed.
Mm.
His eyes his eyes went from dull black buttons to having a very clear life in them.
Mm.
And I thought, "Oh my god, I've got to document this." So I tried to take some photos. The camera didn't work. And that was a big thing with him was camera malfunctions. I tried like 3 photos. I turned the camera around to figure out what's going on, and it took 3 pictures of my face.
Okay.
I turned back to take the photo of him, and the camera didn't work again, and I heard a child giggling, and then the life left his eyes.
Oh. Sometimes nightmares are not made up of scary monsters in the woods. Sometimes it can be something as innocent as a child's toy. In this episode of Magical Journey Podcast, I interviewed David Sloan, the caretaker for Robert the Doll. Sit back, dim the lights, and enjoy. First of all, introduce yourself to the audience. Tell them a little bit about yourself, where they can find you, and where they can find information on you and Robert.
Yeah, well, Key West is usually the best place. Uh, I've I've been I've been working with Robert the Doll for about 30 years, and when I moved to Key West, I moved there to start a ghost tour, and nobody was talking about Robert the Doll, nobody was talking about ghosts, and I found a story about Ann Otto, and I knocked on the door of the artist house and told the owner that's what I was doing, and he said I said, "Hey, I'm starting a ghost tour, I wanna talk to you about your ghost." He said, "Oh, you wanna hear about Robert?" I said, "No, I wanna hear about Ann." He told me, "No, you wanna hear about Robert," and he went into this crazy story about a haunted doll. That ended up sending me on a journey that has lasted 30 years now. So it's really been a gift. I mean, it's taken me places I never thought I'd go. Um, and I think that's a pretty good place to start.
Wow. And just to clarify, because I know there are people that are probably cringing right now, the the doll behind you is actually an effigy of Robert. It's not actually
Yeah.
the real Robert. So, don't you guys don't freak out too much.
Yeah,
Um,
and that one last year, right now, right around Halloween every year in Key West, we do Fantasy Fest.
mhm.
And it's kind of the Mardi Gras of Key West. And last year, Robert the Doll and I were the grand marshals. And Robert's a very valuable artifact. He's owned by a nonprofit in Key West, the Key West Art and Historical Society. And so they're not going to let him out of his case to be paraded in front of 80,000 drunk people. So what we did is I created this effigy, and there's multiple entities inside of Robert the Doll, we believe.
Mhm.
So I made this effigy and I brought it to the and I invited the little girl spirit. And I said, if you want to come and join me in the parade, I've made this for you to feel comfortable. Please feel free to come in to this doll so you can participate. And when I did that, and I don't know if these things are going to work or not when I try them. I like experimenting. I saw Michelle Anthony in the comments. She's been there for the Paranormal Weekend where we try different techniques to create haunted dolls. So that's what I tried to do. I invited the spirit. And the wild thing for me, as soon as we did that, the doll got heavier. It got heavier by at least a pound. There was someone standing there watching who didn't know who Robert was, didn't know what we were doing. I asked him if he wanted to hold the doll there. I call her Abby. And he held her and he started crying. He was overcome with emotion. So I think there's something to that. And so Abby, one of the legends about Robert is that he was created by an angry nanny. And one of the things I've done over the last 30 years is reverse engineer the legends because I uncovered a lot of history. I mean, a lot of true history about the doll and about the Otto family. So I was able to kind of connect these legends that people were telling and say, oh, that's where this stemmed from. And we found that there was a nanny, Emmeline Abbott, and she lost a daughter about
Mm.
the time Robert the doll arrived. We think that's one of the spirits. So I keep her with me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So, what evidence with Robert led you to the conclusion um, that Robert was and is, for lack of a better word, um, talented to the point that he is?
Okay. So I've believed in ghosts since kindergarten when my kindergarten teacher told us about the ghost in her house and showed us a photograph. And then I experienced them at my family's haunted hotel. Uh, and, but they weren't a driving force in my life until I saw a ghost tour in Scotland. And I said, oh, that's what I want to do. So, I mean, I was managing cruise ships. And so I quit my corporate job, moved to Key West to start the ghost tours. And,
Mm.
you know, I was interested in ghosts, but when Daryl at the artist house told me about a haunted doll, at first I was like, "Yoo-hoo." I mean, that's like a Twilight Zone episode. And then I felt something at the house where I knew there was something active, and I'm like, "Okay, what's going on? That's crazy." Uh, then when I went to the museum, and what you have to understand, Robert had only been donated to the museum, I think about 18 or 20 months before I arrived in Key West. And the museum didn't care about ghosts. I mean, ghosts weren't part of their marketing plan or part of their image, as you can understand with the museum. So Robert was kept in the back. You know,
Mm.
they didn't have him on display. Um, I had to talk to 3 or 4 people before they would bring Robert out because the staff all knew. They're like, "There's something up with that doll." But then I talked to Stacy Rousseau, who was the curator there, and she said, "Yeah, I'll bring Robert out for you." And when she did, she was talking to him. She had her she's cradling him in her arms, and she's like, "Hey, Robert, this is David. He's starting something called a ghost tour, and he wants to take some photos of you." And she put him on this table and left me alone. And the doll, it was I didn't think it was haunted. It's very strange. Robert's about 4 feet tall, a little smaller, but he's the size of a small child.
Mm.
And he's dressed in a sailor suit. His face has been eaten away by termites, so it gives him a little bit of a creepy look. And I took some photographs. Everything's fine. And I thought, oh, let me get a picture without his hat on. And I reached in and I took his hat off his head, and Robert came alive. Now, it wasn't like he stood up in the chair and started doing a jig, um, but the energy in the room changed.
Mm.
His eyes his eyes went from dull black buttons to having a very clear life in them.
Mm.
And I thought, "Oh my god, I've got to document this." So I tried to take some photos. The camera didn't work. And that was a big thing with him, was camera malfunctions. I tried like 3 photos. I turned the camera around to figure out what's going on, and it took 3 pictures of my face.
Okay.
I turned back to take the photo of him, and the camera didn't work again, and I heard a child giggling, and then the life left his eyes,
Oh.
and the energy of the room just went back to normal where it was nothing. And the feeling when he was there was very similar to what I'd felt in the attic room at the house where he used to be. And what it does to the mind when these things are happening is not scary. but the brain tries to figure it out, and when it can't make sense of these things, you're like, "Whoa." And so with that, I mean, I kinda I kinda look around, I'm the only one there, but I thought to myself, "Whoa, I'm gonna find out what's making this doll tick."
Mm.
And I've been on that journey ever since. And, we go through periods where we find out nothing, and then there have been a few just major, major breakthroughs where I actually think we've uncovered the truth of it all now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, with that, is there something about the way that Robert was constructed that lends itself to what Robert is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's something that we just discovered. You know, God, the the guy, the singer from Living Color,
Mhm.
he him and his wife came to visit, and they wanted to see Robert. She's very sensitive to things. And, the effigy that we have there, I had had it with me since the parade, and this is probably a month later. So, I told them that I'd show them around the fort before the tour, and I brought that effigy up, and I had it sitting outside the yellow fever tunnel where we normally get a lot of the different soldier spirits. I mean, Robert's in this old Civil War fort, 1862. And they say that it was used as a hospital at one time. So, it's the most haunted place in Florida, and it's because
Mhm.
it's not just Robert. Um, but so Joe was picking up on all these things, and then she went down the tunnel, and she leaned down and started talking to a little girl. And I'm watching her do this, and I'm thinking, "What's she doing talking to the little girl? The little girl is never in this part of the fort." And then I realized, "Oh, I just brought
Mm.
little Abby back that night." And Joe was so tuned in. Uh, I mean, she picked up on things that nobody else has. And then that night, she had a visitor at the house where she was staying, and she described something like I had seen before. And I said, "Oh, do you think it's the little girl?" She goes, "No, no, no, it's an elemental." She said, "It's an earth
Jeez.
elemental." And I'd like to think that, I'm like all knowing with ghost stuff, but I'm not. So, elementals I was a little bit familiar with, but I looked them up, and elementals are basically spirits attached to the earth, wind, fire, or water.
Mhm.
And the earth elementals might be trees. They were first written about by Paracelsus, who was a scientist uh, in Germany. In the Black Forest is where he wrote about these elemental spirits. And I saw that, and I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Robert the Doll is made in Germany."
Mm.
You know, nobody had known where he was from. I was able to identify him as a Stife about a decade ago. So I started looking into the Stife company and where they would have sourced their wood wool, because Robert is stuffed with Excelsior, which is just tightly spun wood. They would have sourced it from the Black Forest.
Mm.
And so that led me on an entire journey. I went to Germany to track down some of these stories. Um, but I believe that the true spirit inside of Robert the Doll is an earth elemental. And then there's something called a kobold, Kobold. And
Mhm.
they can be mine spirits or hearth spirits.
Mm.
And they're they're very helpful, little pranksters, unless you cross them. And if you cross them, you have hell to pay.
Right.
This is precisely like Robert the Doll. So Robert the Doll is not evil. And we consider these things fairy tales, the stories of the kobolds. I I think fairy tales probably were very true, very real for the people experiencing them. It's almost like ghost stories now. There's so much paranormal entertainment taking advantage of the
Mhm.
ghost stories that you almost hear the term ghost story, you almost dismiss it as, as, um, something that's not true. I think that's what happened with fairy tales. And I've come to believe that this German magic is very, very, very real.
Wow. David, your energy is really amazing. No wonder you're able to do this and not be horribly affected by it. I just like you literally just draw people in when you're talking. Um, Let me ask you this though, because I know there is a lot of people who attribute their misfortunes to Robert for whatever reason, like they feel like they've upset Robert in some way or something. Um, what's the most disturbing apology letter that you've ever gotten from somebody about Robert or
There
apologize about?
there are so many.
There's so many.
I mean, when mail comes to the museum, uh, there's a day staff at the museum, and they'll leave the letters out for the night staff who does the tours. 'Cause we're separate entities, I collaborate with the museum to offer the paranormal aspects. But, some of them are really nice, saying, "I love you, Robert. Happy birthday, Robert. Tomorrow's Robert's birthday." Uh,
Aw.
um, so some of them are good like that, but you get some and people who are suffering terribly in their lives, medical problems, relationship problems, money problems, all types of problems, and they attribute it to Robert the Doll, and a lot of times they apologize as a last resort. And here's the thing, I believe Robert does some of these things to people who disrespect him. I've seen too many similarities in letters, too many people struck by lightning, too many people with dead deer in their yard, too many people reporting similarities. So I believe that that's very true. But statistically speaking, people are going to look for someone to blame when things go wrong. There's a lot of people who blame their luggage being delayed on Robert the Doll. And I don't believe that Robert's delaying their luggage. I think that's an airline issue and that it happens statistically. I could be wrong. Maybe he does that. But either way, it's very heartbreaking when you see some of these letters. Um, uh, I've had people who come to the fort, people who have been engaged there, people who've done things, and then incredible health problems turn around on them. And human suffering is not easy in any way, shape, or form. So I think that part is very tragic, and I don't think Robert's responsible for all of it. I think yes, he is going to be a scapegoat.
Mhm.
Um, but I also think there's an aspect of Robert where he's going to invite you into the forest, and he's going to take you on the ride that you're ready for. You look at all the fairy tales, and people go into the forest as one type of a person, and then they experience things where they face their fears, they face the unknown, and ideally they make it out the other side. If they do make it out the other side, they're a stronger person. They return the hero. And I do believe that that's one of the purposes with Robert is is doing that for people and taking them out of their comfort zone and inviting them into the forest.
I can see that. I can definitely see that. So there's a protocol to going about asking Robert permission to take photos of him in particular, no?
No, that's probably the most common um, misconception about him. It's a
Mhm.
man-made myth, right?
Ah,
Uh, and the way that it started, Robert used to mess with cameras before everybody had cell phones, back when cameras were film and they were operated by batteries. And I believe it was just Robert's spirit draining the batteries to try to get energy.
mhm.
And so many camera malfunctions happened, I think somewhere someone along the way said, "Oh, he likes messing with cameras. You better ask permission." And it kind of caught on, and people kept saying that. I t- I tell people, don't ask permission. It's dangerous. When you're
Mhm.
dealing with an entity that you don't know, and there is a good reason to believe there are multiple entities inside of Robert. All that energy people bring.
Mhm.
Some people have said that there's a portal inside of him, and it's an endless number of spirits. But say it's one spirit, if you ask for permission, you're being subservient. You're putting them above you, and when you do that, you're putting yourself at risk. Now, I don't think it's always a huge risk, but asking, "Oh, Robert, can I please do that? Can I please do that?" And then think about this. If you ask the doll for permission, "Hey, can I take your picture?" What's he gonna do? "Hey, yeah, sure, Daniel, take my picture." So, I mean, it's just a stupid man-made legend that's kinda caught on because it has those elements that people like grabbing onto. But anybody who's up there who tests it out, there'll be people like, "I didn't ask permission and nothing happened to me." So it's really only about respect, and that's what I found. If people are respectful, no problem. People are disrespectful, they stick out their tongue, if they flip Robert off, those are the ones who had the issues.
I mean, literally, I can't. I'm trying to wrap my head around a grown adult flipping a doll off. What's going on up here that you're going to lash out at a doll like that? I mean, I realize it's kind of like the people I call the fate tempters. Um, and- but really,
Well, I think, and we talked about this a little bit before the show, how paranormal is very personal. And I think with some people, if they have to dismiss it, if they want to be like, "Hey, it's not real, I'll prove it," they might have good reason for that. And I don't know what that reason is, but wherever they are, wherever their soul is, whatever quantum computations are going on within them, uh, I don't know the reasons, but for them to do that is fine. I mean, maybe that's going to lead them on their journey. So I try never to discount uh, anybody's relationship to the paranormal, uh, whether it's more so than mine or less. No matter which way it goes. Um, but but I think Robert's always there to deliver, and I love it because a lot of people go see him, um, and just as skeptics, which is great, and they'll go in saying, "Hey, yeah, we'll learn some haunted history, we'll have a good time," and a lot of them walk out saying, "Whoa, that was something I never expected."
mm,
And I love that about Robert because he opens things up to so many people. And you can go on ghost tours anywhere, and the chances of seeing a ghost. I mean, I think if you were to take the number of people who do ghost tours and the number who see a ghost and break it all down, it's probably 1 or 2% have these things happening. Um, 99% of the people who go to 40 Spartella Museum see Robert the Doll.
wow.
The 1%, they get too freaked out beforehand and they don't make it. But it makes him very unique,
Mm,
and it gives him this incredible power. And one thing I love, you know, so many people nowadays. By the way, Robert used to be written about as the enchanted doll. When Gene Otto had him, people referred to it as the enchanted doll. He wasn't the evil doll. You know, the internet got a hold of it. Paranormal Entertainment makes a lot of money off of demons and headlines like that. But uh, a lot of autistic or children with autism will come up there, and uh, they'll go in expecting maybe to be afraid, but they'll go in and they'll say, "Oh, Robert's not scary. I love Robert. Robert's my best friend." They see the child spirit. They see the innocence with Robert. And I think they're seeing that real side of things. And what I believe happens is when people go up there and challenge the doll and flip it off and do these horrible things, you've got the little child spirit there. And I think its feelings are hurt. And all these other spirits who are there for the energy,
Mhm.
they're almost protectors. And they'll look at these people who are doing that and they'd be like, oh, I've got this one. And it's almost like one of those spirits will latch onto them and they'll stay with them. They'll go with them and they'll stay with them and they'll cause them problems.
Yeah.
They'll take over their thoughts. They'll take over their dreams. They'll do things around their houses until that person apologizes.
Mm.
And I think that's why you can have hundreds of people who feel like they're being cursed by Robert the Doll at the same time. I think it's different entities protecting that essence, maybe protecting the elemental, probably protecting the little girl.
Wow. Yeah, I could see that. So let me ask you this, and this is kind of a touchy subject for some people, but I'm going to go there. Um, have there been cases where possession has occurred in and around, like with people dealing with Robert?
Yeah, yeah, I've had it happen twice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and, this was early on, I was trying to figure things out, and once I uncovered this treasure trove of history. It used to just be legends about Robert, but Anne Otto, the Otto family, it was Gene Otto who was the boy who had Robert,
Hmm.
and he married, and his wife Anne, uh, after he died, she was a librarian, and in a house history about the artist house, I saw a wedding photo of them, and I had uncovered everything available about the Otto family, and I saw this photo, I'm like, "Whoa, where did that come from?" So, I talked to the historian who had put together this book, Sharon Wells, who had been in Key West since the '70s, and she's incredible. So, uh, I asked her, I said, "Where did you find that photo?" And she said, "Oh, it's in the Otto box in the library vault." So I said, "So what are you talking about?" She said, "Oh, yeah, there's like 6 boxes. Nobody knew about them.
Wow.
There's this huge hurricane vault where all of the archives of the island are kept. And I mean, it's huge and it's massive, and there's so much history, and there's so much that people still don't know what's back there yet." But so I went and talked to the historian and went back there, and these boxes had family photos. It had letters between family members, letters from Gene Otto between his family when he was in France. And I read these hundreds of letters and went through all of this information, and there were little nuggets in them where that's how I was able to discover who the angry nanny was. That's how I ended up finding out about Gene writing his wife out of the will in his later life. I mean, it gave all the answers to so many questions, and really painted an incredible picture. So that was a huge breakthrough, and I thought by realizing that Robert's spirit was the nanny's child, I thought Robert would be happy to know that. And with all this information, that's when I decided, "Oh, I need to write a book and set the record straight on Robert." Um, and then bad things started happening.
Mm.
Really, really bad. The regular haunted stuff with the lights and blah, blah, blah at the house, but then strong surges of electricity coming out of my hands, a basket of bike lights by the front door. I'd reach in to grab one bike light, the entire basket would turn on,
Oh, jeez.
like 10 different lights. I was tapping my hand against my truck to a song, and I had the strongest volt of electricity come out where it threw my arm up, and I almost dislocated my shoulder. I was walking. Here's what freaked me out, the biggest freak out, walking my dog, and a giant wet palm frond lifted up off the ground and shot towards us and then dropped at my feet as if someone was setting it down.
Wow.
And when the dog freaks out and runs back, I go back with it. The thing picked up a second time and came towards us. And then I started getting attacked
Mm.
where the way I've described it, it felt like somebody dropped like a gray pizza dough over my head, and it started sinking in and taking over my thoughts.
Jeez.
And I got so freaked out, and I was actually yanked from my bed, and when that happened, it was like, "Whoa," and I yelped. I'm like, "Whoa," and and my wife now, we just started dating at that time, but, uh, she'd sleep with a sleep mask on, and she heard me yell, and she goes, "What's wrong?" And I was, like, feeling below me, and I couldn't feel anything, so I told her, I said, "I'm falling out of bed." And she said, "Well, get back in." I said, "I can't, I'm still falling." And then I saw that I was very close to the ceiling fan, like, I was just, like, a foot below the ceiling.
Oh, jeez.
And I freaked out and, couldn't speak, and then I thought to myself, I said, "Oh, God help me," and I dropped, and I wasn't even over my bed, I was, probably 5 or 6 feet to the left.
Oh, no.
I hit the floor really, really hard, uh, and I grabbed my computer from beside me, and I went on Facebook, and I said, "I'm dealing with an entity I can't handle, and I desperately need help. Um, don't answer if you can't help me." And that's when somebody who practiced Santeria on the island got a hold of me,
Mm.
and they came and they changed my life. Uh, they were able to help calm things down, and then they did a misa spiritual, which is basically a spirit mass, but it's not like the creepy satanic things like in the movies. But they were able to remove multiple entities from me that were associated
Wow.
with Robert, and that's when I realized that Robert's not a single entity.
It's definitely not a single entity.
Um, and that I mean, that was one of the things that changed my life, that shook me up for a long time. Uh, I was not doing tours of the fort then, I was doing tours downtown. I stopped doing them.
Mm.
There have been a couple of times that I've had to step away from the paranormal because it got too intense. But I finally hit that point where Robert and I have an understanding. I've I've come out the forest on the other side,
Mm.
but it's been 30 years, and a lot of those years have been messed up, like truly messed up years.
Wow.
But you look at things, and listen, I'm not an authority on this, but there, if you look at things, uh, I think it would be Kabbalistic things where there's the tree of life,
Mhm.
but then there's also the tree of death. And not many people know about the tree of death. I think it's called the Quilpother. I don't know. Anyway, look it up, and it'll know. The internet knows a lot, can describe it a lot better than me. But some of us take a journey through the darkness to get to the light,
Mm.
and I think a lot of people involved in the paranormal do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Darkness isn't bad, light isn't good. They're both different, and one wouldn't exist without the other. But they say that, like, when this tree of life was being filled with all that light, uh, there was too much, and some of it overflowed and went down into the darkness.
Mm.
And there's some of us who go and retrieve that light and bring it back to the surface. So I think this navigation of the darkness, that was part of my journey, and I think Robert kind of helped guide me through all that.
Wow. Well, um, before we get much farther, those of you who are watching, I want to encourage you. First of all, if you resonate with anything that we're talking about tonight, if you feel some connection to the stuff that we're talking about tonight, leave me a comment down below and let me know. And don't forget to like, share, and there's several of you who are watching that never subscribe. Hit that subscribe button tonight because that's really what moves me forward.
Robert, love it if you subscribe.
So the you mentioned that you've made several new, um, I guess, new connections, new truths have emerged about Robert over the last year, especially. Um, let's talk about that for a little bit. Let's camp on that some. What are some of the things that you've discovered recently about Robert that kind of make a little more sense out of all of this for people?
So the huge discovery for me was about Robert being an elemental spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that just ended up making so much sense because he was the enchanted doll, and for everything to lead back to the enchanted forest in Germany. So I took a trip back there, and right before I found all of this out, I had noticed something very strange. And this was that almost everybody involved with Robert the doll, everybody who was taking care of the spirits in Robert, and everybody who helped me along my journey with Robert, has a connection to Pennsylvania and Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Pennsylvania German connection, that's pretty strange. So you look first, okay, Gene Otto was the first person to have the doll here in the United States. And his grandfather, Joseph Otto, came over from Germany. He came to Philadelphia and then went to Harrisburg. Okay, and that's where he joined the Army, and the Army sent him to Florida during the Indian Wars. And then, you know, he was at Fort Jefferson during the Civil War. But so Germany, Pennsylvania, Key West with the Army. Now, when Gene Otto died, you had Myrtle Reuter, who became Robert's next caretaker. She was from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and her family, Dowdricks, they come from Germany. She married Bill Reuter. His family was in Philadelphia from Germany. And then his dad was working with a military contract, providing trailers to the military in Key West. So the military was indirectly responsible for them coming to Key West.
Wow.
And then you have my great-great-great-grandfather, the first David L. Sloan. He was in Philadelphia. He married a German woman in Harrisburg. And then he joined the Pennsylvania 47th Volunteers. And the Civil War sent his regiment down to Key West.
Wow.
And his regiment actually helped build the fort where Robert the Doll lives. So through Robert the Doll, I discovered this entire part of my family history that I never knew before. But then you look, I mean, because pretty much, you know, I don't own Robert the Doll, but I care for his spirits just as Myrtle Reuter did, just as Gene Otto did. So you've got the three doll tenders with that same connection. And then Tom Hambright, who was the historian, who is the reason that I stayed in Key West. You know, I traced him back, Pennsylvania German, Key West. And I came up with about 30 different people with that connection. And when I looked back to the beginning, the first person was my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Uberseter. And this was in Pennsylvania in kindergarten. And she's the one who started telling me about ghosts. So I called her maybe a year ago. And I said, this is going to sound really weird to you, but you're the key to this. Why did you start telling me about ghosts? And she told this story about how her and her husband had moved into a house in Pennsylvania, apparently built on a Native American burial ground. And she said their first night there, she woke up to the squirrels going crazy behind the wall. And when she got up to see what was happening, she saw this circle of light on the wall with a line going down through it. And she knew there weren't any street lights and thought maybe there was a car, and she put her hand across the window. It wasn't coming from outside. And she thought, oh no, there's a fire behind the wall. She put her hand up against it, and it was cool to the touch. So she woke her husband, and he said, I see it, but I don't want anything to do with this. And she said that the symbol went away, and the squirrels got quiet. And then all the haunted activity started. So I looked up that symbol to see what it meant. And the first thing that came up was the Irminsul in Germany. And the Irminsul was a tree that the pagans worshipped. And Charlemagne came and chopped it down to force Christianity on everybody. So he did that. And it's funny because Charlemagne's my 40th great grandfather.
Wow.
And then, but he did this. And then the first ruler of the Holy Roman Empire was Otto the Great, who Jean Otto and his family often wrote about how they were related, direct descendants of Otto the Great. So all of this kind of took me like, whoa, what's going on here? So there's all this stuff about sacred trees being cut down for Christianity, the Christians building churches on them, Otto the Great. It was all very intriguing. So my wife and I took a trip to Germany and visited these sites. Like we went searching for the Irminsul, looking for these truths, and it just all leads back to this German magic, which is very intense. But when we were there, and I don't know how we're going to do on time with this, but we did a seance with Robert. We had a paranormal weekend, and Michelle was there for that. Let's see here. So we did this seance, and I invited the elemental spirit of Robert into a root doll that I created. So there's something called an Alruan, like Alruan, and it's basically this root that in German tradition they would capture a household spirit in this root, and then it would be passed down. Whenever a father died, it would be passed down to his youngest son. And so he had Joseph Otto. When he died, his youngest son was Thomas Otto, the doctor. Thomas Otto. His youngest son was Gene. Gene, well, his only son was Robert. So I have a theory that there's this spirit trapped because it's not being passed down. And I invited that spirit into a root doll that I made. And when I did that, something else tried to get into me. It was pretty intense. But then I took that root doll to Germany, and on May 8th at midnight, I took it and I released it into the Black Forest.
Wow.
And after I did that, and then I don't know if anything was in it. I've got my own theories, but I went through the process to see. And when you go into the Black Forest, it's called the Black Forest because it's so dense and so dark. I mean, it was a gibbous moon that night, but when you got into that forest, you could not see a thing. And I had a headlight on and a flashlight. And after I released it and then buried this box with the root in it, I got up and started walking out. After about 5 or 10 minutes, I realized that I didn't have any of my lights on and I could see in the dark.
Wow.
I was walking and I started opening and closing my eyes. I couldn't tell which was which because I could see everything either way. And then I overshot the place I was supposed to cut back down to the Airbnb. But when I went, I came upon this field, and it was like a field of grain, and it was glowing blue. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. So I turned over, I laid down in it, and I look up at the sky, and the moon is there. And I'm thinking, what a beautiful moon. And then this white line shoots across the sky, and it makes that same symbol that my kindergarten teacher described.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was an airplane leaving a trail. Okay. But for it to happen at that moment, because I thought something magical would happen when I released the spirit, but it was just like, no, here's me with several beers in me, opening a box in the forest. It wasn't any aha moment. So, so to go back out and then to see that symbol, it was like, it was like, I'm on the right path.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Uh, In I think you bring up a very important key factor that you do not own Robert,
Hmm.
because I think there's a misconception among people that Robert must have an owner and you must be it. Distinguish for us a little bit about the difference between the ownership of Robert and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Robert the doll was donated to Fort East Martello Museum
Mhm.
on, I think, August 18th, 1994, by Myrtle Reuter. Now, Myrtle had come into ownership of the doll when she purchased the Otto home, or the artist house. And then she cared for Robert for, well, probably, let's see here, it would have been from like 19, 19, yeah, say 1980, a little bit before that, but then up until she donated them. When she donated them, she said, "I never had any problems with the doll, but he tried to lock me in my room. He pushed me in the room and held the door." Um, and I'm friends with people who knew Myrtle very well and shared a lot of insight on her. So she was an incredible woman, not a crazy woman, anything like that. But so she donated them to the museum. Now, the museum, Gene Otto had helped found the museum. He was a founding member. He had the vision for the fort for what it should be. And I'm guessing that's why Myrtle donated the doll there. It was also really the only Florida or only Key West history museum on the island. But then the museum, ghosts, think about the 90s. Ghosts, the big shows weren't out yet. Ghosts weren't something that they'd necessarily be wanting to promote. And Fort East Martello Museum, very few people went there. I mean, it was a beautiful, beautiful museum, but open air, leaky roofs, not an ideal place for artifacts. So they didn't keep Robert out. And Robert wasn't the worldwide star that he is today. People in Key West knew about him, but people didn't like talking about ghosts in the early 90s because if you told people that you had a haunted doll, and people were like, oh, cuckoo. I mean, that's just what the vibe was, which is hard to understand if you weren't around then. So, um, so I went, and once I saw everything happen with Robert, uh, I asked the museum, I said, well, would you put him on display if I send enough people up here to see him? And you're looking at a place that would get maybe no visitors a day, maybe two or three people. So I started my ghost tour, and when I'm getting all these people on my ghost tour and I tell them about Robert at the artist house, I say, go to the museum, call them, go up there, ask them to bring Robert out. And enough people asked to see Robert that they put him out on display. And they put him in a little case with like other Key West characters. It's like the iguana man, the cookie lady, Robert the doll. And
Wow.
and then soon he started, more people started having things happen, and he started becoming more of a star attraction. And then eventually, I mean, a lot of people were going to see him. And then the trolleys started doing tours in town, and they started bringing people up there to see him. And everything exploded. Ozzy Osbourne came down. I was filming with Jack Osbourne for Haunted Highway, and we filmed our spot at Fort East Martello. So I had introduced him to Robert, told him about Robert being there.
Mm.
Um, so that brought Robert back. So I've never owned the doll, but I've been his biggest promoter. Um, I uncovered his history. The museum, they have an obligation to protect their artifacts, and that's what they see Robert as, is an
Mm,
artifact.
mm,
And so they are charged with brand. No, listen, they're not dummies. They know the stories about Robert. They know the paranormal aspects. But you have to understand, as a art and historical society, their primary objective is to protect the doll.
mm,
And because I was involved, uh, really before anybody who's there now, but because of my relationship with the doll and my work with the doll, we collaborate.
mm,
And so they let me handle the paranormal things, and I'll operate the tours at night, and we'll present the haunted history, and they protect the artifact.
mm.
And then, and they've got a gift shop, of course. There's all the Robert merchandise, and that all benefits. And they're a nonprofit organization, so it's all stuff that goes. I mean, an 1862 Civil War fort. It's not cheap. It's not cheap to keep going.
Definitely not.
Um, so they're a very good organization, um, and yeah, that's why I call myself the doll tender, um, and that's one of the cool things about Robert too. You know, you look at any haunted doll out there today, and if you follow the money,
Mm,
you're going to find the origin of the story, right?
right.
People will have a pardon me. People have a haunted doll, and their story is, oh, it came from a thrift store, and there was an old lady who had it, and it was going crazy, and she asked me to take it, or there's not a lot of provenance with them. With Robert the doll, I would say he's the only haunted doll in existence where people were talking about him when it wasn't cool to talk about haunted dolls, and when not a single person involved had a financial benefit or a status benefit surrounding him.
Yeah.
And I came along in 1996 and started sharing the story. God, I should try to buy the doll, but he has a documented history that precedes me or the museum.
Mm,
People thought Gene was crazy. You know? So it wasn't a benefit to anybody.
for real. Yeah.
So,
Uh,
yeah, so if anybody knows of any doll with like a that actually there's a lot of haunted dolls out there now. So I think that's what gives Robert that edge over anything else out there.
very true. Now, you mentioned that you've written a book about Robert, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to get a hold of that because I want to dive into this a little bit more. Um, my curiosity and interest in Robert has been more than just a flirtation for quite some time
Yeah.
because I find, first of all, I find the uh, if you will, the pagan roots of Robert to be very interesting. And coming from the background that I come from, I find that especially the earth elemental part of it to be a big draw for me.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you this as we round out the night, because you've given us a lot of great information, and I think you've lent us some insight, some helpful insight into what Robert is and what Robert is not, which I'm deeply appreciative of because I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings about not only Robert, but about haunted objects in particular. And I understand it comes from our current worldview based on pop culture icons right now and a lot of hype around certain I hate to even use the term, um, but certain objects, haunted objects, um, have become kind of a household curiosity now, and I think for us to get some truths, some insight into Robert is very helpful because, like you said, he was one of the first. He's like literally at the top of the chain when we think about these artifacts. That even seems like kind of a cold term to me in a sense of what Robert is because there's so much about Robert. Um, as we round out the night, though, let me ask you this: what is your wisdom you would impart to people who have a curiosity about dealing with haunted objects, about their approach to, say they decide, oh, I want to go see Robert. You know, what words of wisdom can you impart to them?
I'd say, doing anything with the paranormal, make sure that you have your protectors first. The thing I've been terrible about doing is protecting myself. I let my ego lead the way, and I thought, "Oh, I know things, nothing's gonna mess with me," and it's led me to some really huge problems. So, always, get if you don't know who your spirit guides are, get in contact with them. Make sure that you're not doing any of this alone. uh,
Mm,
when you leave a haunted before you go in, ask for protection, ask for, so usually we have some deceased family members who are guides for us. uh, Most of us have several guides. Try to get to know them, ask for their protection, and then when you leave a haunted place, tell whatever's there to leave. God, I built up so many attachments because I'm so
mm,
freaking stupid and I don't do it. um, and even if you think that it's a joke where you're going, or that it's not haunted, be careful, because what I've found is when I let my guard down, that's when they like to sneak in, and once they grab hold, they can wreak real havoc on your life, and you might not even
yep,
know that it's them doing it. So, um, it kinda goes back to, like, with Robert, with the respect. Go in with respect, and be careful pushing the limits, because, you might be taken for a ride that you're not ready for, but
right,
but
right.
I but I do think everything happens for a reason. I think we go to the places we go for a reason, and I think that the doors open when they're supposed to.
Definitely. And that ride may be a very bumpy ride too,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah,
Um, Again, I cannot say it enough how much I appreciate you coming on and really giving us some valuable insight, some truth about Robert. Because in this particular time period that we're in, I think a lot of people uh, want to ask the questions, and they're just not sure what questions to start with, and even where to go about asking these questions, what sources to go to. Because there's a lot of people out there that will say that they are authorities, or they are um, the big cheese of knowledge, and that's definitely a misconception a lot of times. Um,
yeah, and so Michelle Anthony was just saying, like, make sure you set your own boundaries. Protection is key, and I think the great point she makes there, to set your own boundaries, because paranormal is very personal,
mhm,
and nobody is doing it right except for what's right for them. So don't take anything anybody else says as gospel. Um,
right,
what I find, that intuition, that gut feeling, I've always felt like the gut feeling, that's our family. That's the people watching over us. That's them saying, yeah, no. So it's very, very important. That's an excellent point. Hi,
Definitely
Michelle.
so.
We miss you.
Well, I'm going to get ready to close out the show here, but I want you to hang on for a moment in the back because I got a couple of questions for you.
Yeah, and I just want to say I've got so much respect for the way that you handle everything, Daniel.
Thank you.
You've got such great insight, and you put thought into the paranormal. So I appreciate having this conversation.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that because, yes, this is, to me, it's been a lifelong journey and one that I don't take lightly. So I really appreciate that. All right. I will talk to you in just a moment.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming in tonight. I appreciate this. Wow. I got to tell you, when it comes to the subject of Rob at the Doll, it is one that I hold very close for several reasons and have a lot of admiration for not only Robert, but for the story behind Robert. And I hope you have gained some insight tonight that will help you to appreciate not only Robert, but other haunted objects that are out there and that you may even come in contact with or could be in your own home. Anyway, I love you guys. Thank you again. Don't forget, push that subscribe button, and may your journey always be magical.
I've waited for so long to see when you come back to me. Through the wars and battles that were lost, we're born again, it's you and me. The rest is history. Past lives. Past lives. Did we dance together on different floors in 1500 or 1504? We must have been lovers, we must have been something in our